Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. As Mick and I were talking, Jack pulled up behind in his tatty old B-Reg VW Passat that I'd actually sold to Mick a couple of weeks earlier. Jack came up to say a quick hello, and then we set off towards the Halfway House pub, me and Mick in the Hilux and Jack following behind. On the way, Mick explained that when we got a bit nearer, we would pull over so I could get in the Passat with Jack. Mick didn't want us to be seen, otherwise Tate would realise he had company. Once I was in the other car, Jack would tell me exactly what to do. Just before we got to the pub, we stopped in the entrance to the country park, and Mick told me to get into the Passat with Jack, who turned the car round and then produced a set of false number plates with double-sided sticky tape on them. He tried to stick them over the existing plates, but it was too damp and wet, so he eventually gave up. I got into the driver's seat and he told me to head to the Halfway House and wait close to the exit of the car park. From where we were, we had a clear view of the car park entrance and could see all the cars coming in. We could also see Mick's Hilux parked on the other side of the pub, but no sign of Mick. "What are we waiting for?" I asked Jack. There was no reply. It was pretty cold, so I kept the engine running to stop the windows steaming up and to stop us freezing. But I knew a much better way of staying warm. "Hey," I said, "while we're waiting, let's go in the pub and have a couple of beers." Jack slowly turned his head and looked at me. "No," he said firmly. Suppose I wasn't all that surprised. Jack wasn't just teetotal, he was some kind of freak. All he ever drank was water and orange juice. He didn't touch anything fizzy and wouldn't go near tea or coffee. His only vice was chocolate. He ate Galaxy bars like they were going out of fashion. All of a sudden, Jack said, "Right, off we go." As I pulled away, I looked over towards the car park entrance and saw a dark blue Range Rover coming in. I couldn't see who was inside, but I assumed it was Pat's car. We set off down the A130, and Jack said he was going to show me where to drop him off and pick him up, and that I was to leave him there and come back when he rang me as soon as they had completed the deal. I drove over the Rettendon Turnpike, still on the A130 towards Chelmsford. I went up the hill through Rettendon Village and was bombing down the other side when Jack told me to slow down, as we would soon be doing a right turn. He pointed out this tiny little lane up ahead and told me to turn into it and turn the car round immediately. I watched as Jack got out of the car and took some stuff off the back seat. He took a coat, a prison donkey jacket with the plastic bit on the back cut off, and a big canvas sausage bag. As Jack was walking away, I asked him if I had time for a quick beer while he was gone. "What are you, some kind of alcoholic? We won't be long, just wait, and when you come back, turn around straight away so we can head off." Then he vanished in the darkness, and I drove off. Sitting alone at home, Sarah Saunders was starting to feel a little sorry for herself. Earlier that day, she had phoned Pat Tate, hoping to have a civilised discussion about how much maintenance he planned to pay her. She might just as well have hoped for world peace. Tate had been almost impossible to talk to. He was in a really scary, excited, hyped up state, and had obviously been taking drugs. There was no point in trying to reason with him like that. It had ended up in a furious row and he had slammed down the phone. But despite everything that had happened, Saunders still cared for Tate deeply and was anxious that their son would have a proper relationship with his father. She glanced at the watch. It had been more than 5 hours since they had last spoken. With any luck, he might have calmed down. She took a deep breath and reached for the phone. It may have been close to freezing outside, but the atmosphere inside the Range Rover was warm and jolly. Tate, Tucker and Rolfe were preoccupied with the vast amount of money they were soon to be collecting and the pre-celebration meal they had planned for later that evening. They were firing questions at Steele, who was sitting in the back beside Tate, asking exactly when he'd be leaving for Holland and when he'd be landing. In between giving directions to Craig Rolfe, Steele reassured the gang that they were at most a couple of days away from their nice little earner. Just as the Range Rover turned into Workhouse Lane, Tate's mobile came to life. "Hello?" "Oh, hello, darling." "Really?" "Oh, you sweetheart. Look, maybe I can come by tomorrow. Listen, I can't talk now. I'm with some people, alright? We'll talk later, okay? Miss you too. Bye." Steele bit his lip as he tried to stop his anger mounting. Up until that point, everything that Sarah Saunders had told him indicated that she and Tate could hardly stand each other. Yet here they were having this loving, caring conversation. But Steele didn't have time to dwell on it for long. A split second later, the Range Rover reached the bottom of the lane. "There's a gate down here," said Rolfe. "What do you want to do?" Steele had to think quickly. When he and Jack had checked the lane out before, the gate had been open. Had Jack shut it for some reason? Perhaps there were some other people in the field. Perhaps Jack wasn't there at all. The only thing to do was to play it by ear. "I'll get it," he said. "You lot stay in the warm." Craig Rolfe was the first to die. As soon as the rear passenger door had opened and Steele was clear, Jack Wholmes had leaned in with a pump action. He pressed the barrel against the back of the driver's headrest and pulled the trigger. The pellets ripped through the fabric and straight through Rolfe's skull, leaving a gaping hole right between his eyes. Both his hands were still on the steering wheel. His foot was on the brake. He looked like he had just pulled up at a set of traffic lights. Tony Tucker was next. With the blast ringing in his ears from just a split second before, he had no time to react. Wholmes moved the gun and shot him in the back of the head. He died with his legs crossed and his mobile phone sitting in his lap. Tate, sitting in the back seat, was the only one who would have known he was about to die. By the time Wholmes trained the gun on him, less than 2 seconds after firing the first shot, Tate was wailing and pushing himself into the corner of the car, making a futile escape. Wholmes paused for a second, as Tate began begging for his life, wailing and whining. This time, Steele fired first, both barrels ripping through Tate's belly. "Wait! Stop! What are you doing? No!" Tate's voice was getting higher and higher as his pleas got more desperate. Then Steele appeared beside Wholmes holding a gun, and Tate knew it was all over. He raised his hands to protect himself with such ferocity that his knuckles smashed through the rear window and he screamed for his life. At that same instant, one shot tore off the left side of his face, while another split open his chest, ripping his liver apart. There was no doubt that the three were dead, but this was more than just an execution. Wholmes pumped his shotgun and opened the front door of the car. He put the barrel up against what was left of Tucker's head and fired again. The pressure inside Tucker's skull was more than it could bear. His head literally exploded as the bones broke through the skin. Then Wholmes went round to Rolfe and did the same. This time the shots were fired from such close range that they singed the fur collar on his anorak and pushed his jawbone across to where his ear would normally be. In the meantime, Steele was getting excited and reached out to Wholmes. "Give me more cartridges! Give me more cartridges!" He loaded and fired again, only to have his gun fall apart. Both men burst out laughing, and Steele scrambled around on the floor in the pitch black, looking for his barrel. Darren Nicholls had driven down the road past several tempting pubs and parked on the side of the road to wait for Jack to call him. I checked my phone and saw I wasn't picking up much of a signal, so I decided to move. I ended up driving back past the lane and then took the first turning on the left. I went down a little way and turned around, so I ended up parked on a bit of a hill. I looked at the phone again to check the signal, and at that very moment it started ringing. It was Jack. "Come and get us," he said. "That was quick," I replied. But the line had already gone dead. He'd hung up. I retraced my steps, pulled into the lane and immediately turned the car round. Almost straight away, Jack was at the back door of the car and got in, sitting down in the darkness. "Where's Mick?" I asked. He won't be long. He's just dropped something. Doesn't want to leave it there," said Jack. And then he made this really weird sound, a bit like a series of quiet little snorts. I could just about make out his silhouette in the rear-view mirror, and then his big shoulders were bobbing up and down. It took me a while to work out what was going on. Jack was giggling. I was still looking at Jack in the rear-view mirror when Mick appeared and opened the front passenger door. As soon as he did, the interior light came on, and that's when I saw Jack's hands. He was wearing surgical gloves, and they had been splashed with streaks of blood, and on the back of one of them was a lump of greyish slime surrounded by lumps of hair and skin and more blood. "Turn that fucking light out!" screamed Mick. I didn't think. I just went into autopilot, started scrambling about on the roof of the car trying to find the light switch, but as Mick sat down and shut the door, the light went off anyway. And suddenly, it was pitch black again. But I could still see Jack's hands, and I could still see the blood and bits of brain. I felt like someone had sucked all the air out of me because I wanted to speak. I desperately wanted to say something, but no matter how I tried, I just couldn't get any words out. Mick told me to get going, and though my mind was elsewhere, my body somehow obeyed, putting the car into gear and moving off towards the main road. From then, everything happened in slow motion. I saw the headlights, heard the screech of tyres and braced myself for impact. But it never came. Mick had grabbed the steering wheel at the last moment and wrenched it to one side, avoiding a crash by just a few inches. The other driver flashed his lights and swore at me out of his half-open window. I just pulled out onto the main road without looking. But I honestly didn't know where I was or what I was doing. I just sat there like a zombie. "For fuck's sake, Darren, drive carefully," said Mick. "What are you trying to do, kill us all?" Jack, sitting behind me, thumped the back of my seat with his fist. "Arsehole," he growled. I was still in shock, but I felt myself slowly coming back down to earth. I mumbled a half-hearted apology and carried on driving back towards the Rettendon Turnpike. All at once, I felt like I was going to be sick, that I had a splitting headache, that I was freezing cold and boiling hot. My mind was racing, but it kept coming back to the fact I'd only been away for a couple of minutes. Surely they didn't have time to do anything. I desperately wanted to know what exactly happened back there, but at the same time I didn't want to know anything about it. I just couldn't take it in. I wanted to pretend that I hadn't seen or heard anything, but that wasn't going to happen. Mick turned to Jack and broke the silence. "Those cunts won't be threatening us again," he said. "Too right," came the reply. I was just trying to concentrate on the road when a glint of metal caught my eye. I chanced a sideways glance and saw that Mick was passing Jack the barrels of a sawn-off shotgun, followed by the stock and the trigger mechanism. And then it got worse. Jack moved forward so he was sitting with his head between the two front seats, just the way that naughty kids do when they're little. And he and Mick started going over all the details of what they'd done. "I'll tell you, Darren, it was well funny," he said with a grin. "Because Mick shot one of them and his fucking gun fell apart, bits all over the place. That's what he was looking for, the thing he dropped. Oh, couldn't believe it. There we were trying to do a job and he spends half the time on the floor trying to find the barrel." By now, Mick was smiling too. "Did you shoot the back window by mistake?" he asked. Jack shook his head. "Nah, I think Pat must have done it with his hand. I never miss. Not from that distance anyway." Then Jack turned to me. "You should have seen him, Darren. It was pathetic. Hard man." Squealing like a baby he was. I had absolutely no idea what to say or what to do. How do you respond to something like that? I felt as if I was no longer in the car, just a spectator looking on and listening in. All I could think was, what am I doing here? What's going to happen now? Mick spoke again. "You'll never believe it, Jack. That soppy cow Sarah, she only phoned Pat's mobile just as we were going down the lane. All that talk about how she hates him and wants him out of her life, and how pleased she'd be if something bad happened to him. And there they were having this lovey-dovey chat. Made me want to throw up. Well, actually, I was shitting myself. I was just waiting for him to say, "Oh yeah, I'm here with Mick and some of the lads." And that would have been it, wouldn't it? We'd have had to call the whole bloody thing off. But he never did, thank God. I bet she'd kick herself if she knew how close she had come to saving him. Jack grunted in agreement, and Mick continued. "Oh, mind you, I don't know how I'd have stopped you. When we got down the bottom of that lane and the gate was locked, I didn't have a clue where you were until you handed me the gun and started shooting. I thought we'd blown it." I heard myself speak, my voice soft and low. "I hope I never upset the two of you." For some reason, Mick and Jack thought this was hilarious. The two of them fell about, absolutely pissing themselves. "Nah," chuckled Mick, wiping away tears of laughter. "You're not like them. It wouldn't happen to you." Although I knew the roads reasonably well, the state I was in meant that Mick and Jack had to give me instructions for every turn like I was some kind of learner driver. Left at the swimming pool, left at the set of traffic lights, down the bottom, second on the right into the car park of the Hungry Horse pub. I spotted Mick's Toyota Hilux parked up in the corner and pulled the Passat alongside. It was only when I tried to stand up that I realised how much I was shaking. Jack and Mick jumped out and started changing their clothes. They were still really animated and talking quickly, but I was no longer listening to what they were saying. It was then that I noticed for the first time that they were wearing identical outfits. Dark green boiler suits, Wellington boots and surgical rubber gloves, all of which were stuffed into a couple of bin liners and placed in the back of the truck. And as I stood watching them, I tried to throw up, but nothing came out. Jack took the Passat and drove off, while Mick got into the Hilux and waved me into the passenger seat. Then we set off for Mark's Tate where my own car was waiting. As soon as Jack had gone, Mick's mood changed. He was quieter, more thoughtful. He was obviously going over the evening's events in his mind. Then after a few minutes of silence, he suddenly said, "Jack's a cold-hearted bastard." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, the second I got out the Range Rover, he leaned in with a pump action and shot the three of them. Boom, 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 just like that, like it was nothing to worry about. He was just so detached, so emotionless. He was like he was serving up chips or something. I mean, he could have been doing anything. But we had to do it together, you see. That way one of us could never give evidence against the other. We'd both be equally guilty. That was the deal." I said nothing. All day long I'd been dying for a beer, but now all I could think about was drinking half a bottle of whiskey to blot everything out. I suggested we both go for a drink, or three. At first Mick agreed, but by the time we got back to Mark's, Tate had changed his mind and said it would be best if we went straight home. I knew my wife and kids were expecting me, but I just couldn't face them. I pulled out my mobile and phoned my mate Rick, told him I'd had a really shitty day and asked him to meet me down the pub. He stayed for a couple and we talked about any old bollocks, but then he had to go home to his girlfriend. In the end, I just stayed there on my own, sitting in the corner and drinking myself into an absolute stupor. You have been listening to Blogs 19, written by Tony Thompson. This book is available to purchase online at Amazon and other online book retailers. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.